So hopefully I don't let you down, but I'm going to be sharing with you some slides that related to an orthopedic surgical presentation I gave. But I would put forth to you that the concepts that I raise aren't unique to orthopedic surgery, and in fact I think are very generalizable to physiotherapy, to occupational therapy, and generally to research as a whole. And what I will do is I'll challenge you to think about what you can be doing to think bigger than you are right now. By thanking Dr. Steve for his very, very kind words, and once again, being grateful for the opportunities I have. Coming here to this particular institute is for me a personal pleasure and joy to come, because I enjoyed working with so many enlightened individuals, and you have such a wonderful leadership, and the spirit of the trainees yourselves, the orthopedic trainees, is wonderful. So I bring forth to you a topic to think big, and by thinking big I put in brackets to be really thinking big. Your ideas have to become simpler, not more complex. So how we think actually is highly dependent upon our perspective. And you can think about your own life. My perspective started 15 years ago, where I met who arguably is probably the father of modern day evidence-based medicine. We use that terminology all the time, but if you look up historically, the most recent movement, it started not longer than about 20 years ago. And Professor Gordon Guyot, when I first met him when I was a resident in training, he asked me, he said, what do you want to do? I said, well, I'd like to make change in my field. He goes, well, if you're going to make change, you've got to think big. He goes, are you ready to really do things big? I said, oh, I'm ready to do it. You're a student, you're saying, I'll do it. Just tell me what I have to do. And he says, it's not about thinking, it's about acting. And he said, well, I didn't understand what he meant, but now looking back 15 years, I'll share my reflections with you. This is the group of people that I get a chance to work with most days. And this is the research group that started actually with one person. And we've grown. Actually, this represents a portion of the individuals I get to work with, and we run clinical trials and clinical research. And I'll put forth to you again, when I look back, it really has been so much about collaboration, but it requires a very broad perspective, a perspective that we don't always take. We often get focused on me, and we don't always think about the larger we. And it's a process, not an act. Writing a test is a process, is an act. You have to finish the write, you get a mark on it. But when they say, let's move to thinking big, you don't decide tomorrow, I'm going to think big or I'm going to do something grand. You ultimately get to that point. When we often look at major leaders, and we often say to ourselves, look how lucky they were, oh, they had so much this, or they were given this, or they were given that. Oftentimes, doors were probably open for some of these individuals, but to actually make benefit of an open door, you actually have to physically walk through that door. You have to actually do something. You have to take advantage of the opportunity. And taking advantage of opportunity is a process. It's not necessarily just happens for you overnight. And you cannot build a reputation on things you're going to do. So when you look again at what you hope to do, and I really want you to think more so about you internalizing this rather than me just telling you, sort of a story. But ask yourself, what is it that you want to do in the next few years? Ask it, what is it you want to do today, tomorrow, next year, the next 5 years, and ultimately how you want to be remembered as, for your career. And when you think of that, it changes your perspective on the actions you'll do today, because you're planning for tomorrow. But at the end of the day, you can write, you can think, but somehow you actually will be remembered by what you did. And so, however we decide that, we have to think about action. So that really means you've got to get something done, right? We have to move. So when we think about our field, when we think about research, when I think about how I'm going to move in a certain direction, it's really how am I going to execute this plan? So much about this is execution. And I think one of my favorite quotes by Indira Gandhi was, my grandfather once told me that there are two kinds of people, those who do the work and those who take the credit. He told me to try to be in the first group because there was much less competition. Right? So it really means you've got to roll up your sleeves, you've got to get down to getting the work done. And we all know that person, right? We know that person who always takes credit, and we know we did the work, and they're getting the credit, and that's going to happen in your life. But at the end of the day, you're better off to be the person being a little bit bothered by the one who's taking the credit, because you're the one doing the work, and at the end of the day, people will recognize those who do the work. I guarantee you, all the professors, all the teachers, they know who do the work and they know who takes credit. They know that. And even, you don't have to tell people that. Just do the work and it'll work out for you. But to do work and to get good at something, you have to practice. I always use the example of, pick something that requires some degree of skill. So I'm not a golfer, but I know that if I were to go outside here with a golf club and swing 1,000 times, just keep swinging it, I would probably be no better after my 1,000th swing than I am right now. It's likely because I'm just blindly swinging, right? Or if you're blindly memorizing something, are you really going to get better at it? It's something you bring in and you take out. So what is deliberate practice? This is what separates people who get really good. In fact, people who become experts, if not leaders, from those who are good but maybe not hit that extra level. So deliberate practice is an activity specifically designed to improve performance. So you can practice whatever it is. If you're working on your grant writing, you're doing that. If you're working on a physiotherapy maneuver, if you're working on a technique, that's practice. You have to practice to get better at it. So it has to be repetitive, you have to keep going, but here's the critical factor. You have to be absolutely refining it, continually changing it based upon one thing, feedback. You have to have feedback. Someone has to tell you whether you're doing it right or wrong, or you have to have some internal mechanism. Usually in this environment, as students, someone tells you, you have your professors, you have your mentors, they tell you, or your colleagues, your friends will tell you, this is what I do. You chronically get better and you consistently get that feedback. Practice in the absence of actual focused planning and deliberate, practice to get better is probably not going to be that helpful. So, people say practice makes perfect. No, perfect practice makes perfect. You've got to be good at practicing to know what you're doing, right? So remember that and as a thinking for anything you do. And you have to be thinking about it, right? Getting good at something, right? When you think about your careers and your lives, getting good at something means you think about it. It isn't between the hours of school, or isn't between the hours of, and you don't do it on Saturday and Sunday because that's not really when you're learning. You're always thinking about it. When you're an artist, the great artists, the great artists were thinking about it every minute of every day. And it becomes part of you, it becomes your character. So think about what it is you really like, what aspects of your career you like, and think about how you can actually improve. But usually you do it by thinking about it a lot. This is a fellow, some of you may know, he's an American comedian, Chris Rock, but what he does is also important. Even if these people at the highest levels, of their comedic genius, what they do is they say they play small shows, right? Before going to an audience like this, you would have practiced this. I can tell you that when I gave this talk to the Canadian Orthopaedic Association, which had a number of, probably 300 or 400 surgeons in the audience, I had done that talk at least 30 times to a smaller group, because what I was doing, I started off with 170 slides, and I decided very quickly after multiple repetitions which slides worked, which slides didn't work, which slides got me this kind of nod, and this slides people like, they're looking or texting, and that slide got me, because no one likes that slide, and no one's interested. So you decide by feedback, but the problem is you want to be connected to your audience. If you're going to give a message, you have to have people listening and engaged. So practice, practice, practice. This is, and I'm not a football player. Quite frankly, I don't even really watch that much sports, but I do know this person. This person was one of the greatest football receivers, they say, in NFL history. But look at this. Over his career, they said he probably spent about 20,000 hours practicing, and roughly about 150 hours where he was actually in a game. So that represents about 95% of his career was practice. But he became the best, playing very small percent. 1% of his whole career was actually playing the game that he was known for. But in that 1%, he maximized it because he spent so much of his time thinking about it and thinking about getting better. There were rumors that he would just be thinking. He would dream about how we maneuver. He would visualize what I'm going to do. Same way that we can think about our own lives, right? You can visualize your next step. You can visualize your next year. You can visualize walking into a potential application for a position. You can visualize getting that position. But all that has to come from everything you've done to prepare that makes you ready to take on the next step. So again, think about practice. When we think about music, you can decide, for people who are these top level musicians who basically have these statements. And you think about this, right? When you can live your life very safe, very low risk, or you can live your life with some risk, but then there's an opportunity for great, big things to happen. And this is really what everyone juggles, right? We juggle that in our own mind, and we juggle that in our career. So Thinking again, well, what you're trying to do, you have to have a balance, but you have to decide what you're going to do. But this is the world that we live in. And if your world is a golf ball and you're Tiger Woods, you're going to practice and get good. And you can think of the things that he's done to get good at what he does. If your world's a tennis ball, then you're going to be thinking about Federer, who's looking to become, probably is one of the most decorated, tennis stars. But what is it that they do? What makes them unique, right? What makes him different than other people, right? And when you look at your field and you read the textbooks, the authors that are reading, say, what makes these individuals that I'm learning about, who led these techniques, who are sort of the, sort of the icons in my field, or where I aspire to be? What is it unique about them? And then look at your own self, and really, there isn't a lot separating. Yes, there's a degree of internal talent, but I bet you that the majority of this is not talent. The majority of this is hard work. And we often forget that. We often think that they're just gifted. I can guarantee you that very few people are truly gifted. Most people work very hard to get to this type of level, and that's what it's about. And the bigger you think, the ideas have to get simpler. That's just by fact. I don't think you can have highly complex ideas and reach the world. For example, the reason that most people know Stephen Hawking is because he is trying to do something that hits each and every person, whether you're sitting here, whether you're sitting in China, whether you're sitting in Ontario, Canada, where I live. At the end of the day, we all have an innate desire to understand where we are and what humanity means in this world, or in this universe, right? So he's capturing something that is a very simple core idea. What is our purpose in this world? So he's captured that, and that's why it is a big, big idea, and that's why his work is known. When we think about Gandhi, you can think about it. He's led a nation to the message of peace and nonviolence. Right? There's not a single human being that doesn't resonate with the concept of peace and nonviolence, right? So the message is resonating with the world. But the truth is, and I look at that myself as that person in the computer. I spend a lot of time on computer writing and preparing papers, etc. But most of us walk through our lives a reflection of the village we live in. And I remember I'm giving this talk in Canada to Canadian orthopedic surgeons who I believe actually have quite frankly, have a lesser global vision than you would. So talking to you and asking you about the global village, I guarantee that this group knows far more about the world than the Canadians know about the world, or the United States certainly know. I think that's a fact. And so, I mean, it's a little bit different in that you have a much broader perspective, I perceive, but still, you can still walk through life only thinking about what's happening here and not the bigger perspective. And it took me actually a book that I read to my daughter, who's now 4.5 years old, and this is a children's book that actually gave me probably the greatest insight around the challenges. So let's assume we have about 100 people. I'm probably a bit less, but let's assume we have 100 people in this room, right? If we were that village, right, of 100 people, and that village and that world is represented by that village, well, this is now, remember, I'm speaking to Canada, so this is, you understand the analogy. But 40 of us would be from either India or China. That's the truth. Right? 48 of us would live on $2 or less than $2 a day. 50 of us would be hungry and one would likely die from hunger. That's the reality of that village we live in. 8 of us would have internet access. And at that point, I kind of went like this, and everyone here, this front row of, orthopedic surgeons who were sitting in Canada said, that's it. Just you 8 would have internet, and everyone else, good luck, right? And that's sort of and it doesn't hit them. They don't think that way. And I think, we often appreciate, I think you appreciate it far more because you live in an environment where you see it when you walk to work. 1 of us would have a college degree, right? And 5 of us would control 32% of the entire village's, wealth. And that's sort of the reality of the global village we live in. So we look at it as this is our world. When you're living in the United States or in North America, I must say, quite frankly, your world, that's it. That's all they see. That's all, when you're in that country, when we're in that country, you get narrow-minded, you think, well, this is our world. If it matters to us, it has to matter to everybody else. And that is, I think, is the challenge of thinking small. So this is the North American model of thinking big. Wealth accumulation, Warren Buffett, lots of money, billionaires, right? That is everyone aspires to be the next Warren Buffett. Everyone aspires to be Bill Gates. They want that kind of mentality. It's a highly focused on the acquisition of wealth. However, that doesn't mean that there's not a lot of good people in that. And not said these aren't good people, but they're just a different ideal. When we surveyed surgeons